You're listening to Real Mysteries, Episode 4, The Investigation Continues. Real Mysteries is brought to you in part by Roadrunner Press.
I'm Brenda Bennett. In our previous episode, we learned about the arrest of Timothy McVeigh. But was he the only person involved? Several conspiracy theories have hypothesized about others being involved in the 1995 Alfred P. Murrah building bombing in Oklahoma City. So let's discuss the trail of evidence. Perhaps you'll be able to judge for yourself if others were involved. Here is Real Mysteries producer Jeremy Gossett.
Joining us now is attorney and author Kent Freitas. He's the author of Oklahoma's Most Notorious Cases, and that book features a series of chapters on the Oklahoma City bombing. Kent Freitas, thank you so much for joining us on Real Mysteries.
Thank you for having me.
The extensive amount of research that you've done in preparing for writing this book, tell us a little bit about the research you did in order to write about McVeigh and Nichols, and also the overwhelming amount of evidence that I'm sure that you have to sift through.
Right. In McVeigh and Nichols' case, there were three different trials. One of the trials was held in Oklahoma, and it was never appealed, so there was not a transcript of that trial. The other two trials had voluminous transcripts, thousands of pages. Those were available. Of course, for a book like this being, I would say, impossible, it would be unlikely that anyone would read those whole transcripts ever for any reason, but what they were was they were a great source of facts and fact-checking. I also did interviews with people that were involved in the trials, the prosecutors, the defense lawyers, the judge in the Oklahoma case. And then there were some very good books that were written about the subject. Only really one of them dealt with McVeigh himself, and that was a book called American Terrorists that was written by two Buffalo, New York journalists. McVeigh confided in them and gave them a number of interviews after he had been sentenced to death and was still in the prison waiting to be executed. So it was a pulling together of the information from all those sources. Interviews were helpful, but the transcripts of the trial were helpful. Everything added up. It's just pulling together a lot of information, correlating it, and then trying to decide how to present it in a way that wouldn't bore the reader to death.
What's interesting about your book is the fact that you bring to light so much of the background of Timothy McVeigh, and you begin describing a lot of his life in an interesting way. Tell us a little bit about that and the chapters in the book that deal with McVeigh.
Timothy McVeigh is a morbidly fascinating person. He started out as a rather ordinary person through high school. He was bright and did well. He became a very successful, disciplined, patriotic soldier, and he fought in combat in Desert Storm in the first Iraq War. Kind of the turning point, or one of the turning points in his life, was that he had always wanted to be an Army Ranger. And he had a chance to be an Army Ranger because he was such a good soldier. He was approved to go into training. And he went into training, but he ill-advisedly went to the training right after he had been fighting in Iraq. And his mental and physical condition, along with several other Iraqi veterans, was just not up to it, and all of them dropped out of the course. But once he dropped out of that, he seemed to lose interest in the service, and he already had sort of a predisposition or a bent that was an anti-government militia kind of mind. And after he got out of the service, that developed more and more over time, eventually leading him to become a zealot, and unfortunately leading him to determine that he wanted to strike out against the government. And his method of striking out was, of course, to build a bomb and blow up the Murrah building.
The investigation of the bombing in Oklahoma City was ongoing. There was still a round-the-clock rescue and recovery operation going on by experts from Oklahoma City and across the country.
From the Justice Department, a briefing from Attorney General Janet Reno.
This has been a tragic and heartbreaking day. I can tell you this: the FBI and the law enforcement community will pursue every lead and use every possible resource to bring the people responsible to justice. The FBI has established a command post in Oklahoma City, and it is in 24-hour contact with FBI headquarters command post and with the Department of Justice. 4 FBI special agents in charge have been dispatched to the scene to provide 24-hour operation of the command post. The FBI has sent 4 evidence response teams and explosive ordnance teams to Oklahoma City. 5 of the very best FBI agents experienced in this type of investigation are arriving in Oklahoma City, as have bomb technicians from Boston, Chicago, Miami, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. 13 members of the Rapid Start team will be entering data as the evidence is collected. 50 more agents are available for arrival tomorrow, and more will be used as needed. The FBI and federal law enforcement have received superb cooperation from local authorities in Oklahoma City, and the federal law enforcement agencies are working together. The ATF has sent 2 national response teams and a mobile command center. It has 3 explosive technicians and 3 laboratory technicians in Oklahoma City, and it is prepared to send 20 to 25 more personnel tomorrow. The Secret Service is also sending explosives experts. In addition, the Oklahoma National Guard has been deployed to assist in control of the area and the evacuation of the injured. The United States Army has deployed the 61st Ordnance Detachment with a robot from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The Tulsa Police Department has deployed 2 bomb technicians, 2 dogs, and a robot. And the FEMA is playing a major role in aid and assistance. We cannot tell how long it will be before we can say with certainty what occurred and who is responsible. But we will find the perpetrators and we will bring them to justice.
Have you put out a bulletin seeking some particular suspects, and what can you tell us about that? There are reports that there are descriptions of a couple of people who were seeking.
What I can say about all evidentiary issues and all leads is that it would hinder the investigation to discuss any action that we are taking in pursuant to the leads, but we are pursuing absolutely every shred of evidence available.
Can you share with us your hunch as to whether this is domestic or international terrorism?
I don't do hunches.
The first scenario that investigators considered was that the perpetrators may be Middle Eastern terrorists associated with the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center in New York City. One man of Jordanian descent was detained, questioned, and then cleared.
This is from the April 20th, 1995 investigation update to the public by Attorney General Janet Reno.
We have just announced developments in the case. Investigators have identified a vehicle that was used in connection with yesterday's attack on the federal building in Oklahoma City. They have determined that 2 white males, each with a medium bill, were associated with that vehicle. We will seek arrest warrants for these 2 men. Composite sketches of these 2 men have been prepared. We have copies here for everyone. Both of these men should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Citizens should not, therefore, attempt to take any action against them. Anyone with information about these 2 men should provide it immediately to the nearest FBI office. They can also call phone banks the FBI has specifically established to receive their information. We urge people with information to call 1-800-905-1514.
Was there only one bomb?
At this point, we have confirmed only 1 bomb.
Can you tell us what materials were used to make the bomb?
At this point, we can't confirm it. The FBI in Oklahoma City indicated that it was probably fertilizer and fuel oil.
The fact that you've identified 2 white males as suspects, does that diminish the possibility of involvement by a Middle Eastern group?
We are going to pursue every lead. We are excluding no lead. We have received information from a variety of sources concerning a variety of leads, and we will continue to pursue every lead.
What can you tell us about the man being returned from London?
Nothing other than that he is being returned to this country.
Is he considered a suspect or a witness?
At this point, he is being returned as a possible witness.
Under escort?
Under escort.
Anything about the rate of calls that you've been getting to the special phone banks, and how much are you relying on help and information from the public to find these suspects?
Any American I know will want to do anything they can with any piece of information that they believe is relevant to identifying these people. And clearly, in an investigation of this sort, such assistance and support is important. It is so critically important when you have a tragedy of this dimension that everyone join together and responsibly and thoughtfully respond when they can be of help or they think they have information that can be of help.
Some people are saying the FBI didn't follow through on these, checking up on these.
I can assure you that the FBI follows up on everything with regards to these issues that we can possibly follow up on.
Bob Ricks, Special Agent in charge with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Well, you get conspiracy theories that run the whole gamut. I mean, even when I was in the FBI back in the mid-'80s, we were still running down conspiracy theories in the JFK assassination. I headed up the Violent Crimes Branch, which was responsible for dealing with those. You have different types of people. They fall in different areas. Some are people of goodwill, I would say, that are misled. We used to call people who assisted the communist movement as useful idiots. And that's probably a good term to apply to some of these people in that they advance a cause that others have, but they don't understand all the facts that are involved. There are others that you have a panoply of con men that are out there, and they're using it to advance their own, either themselves or book sale or in some way try to create themselves as some expert and hold themselves up as an expert.
So the investigation went in another direction. After all, the truck axle had been traced to McVeigh, and evidence of his involvement was beginning to pile up. Once again, here's Kent Freitas.
Early in the investigation, after they tied the Ryder truck to Junction City, the FBI agents went to Elliott's body shop in Junction City, which was the place where the Ryder truck had been rented. Elliott operated not only a body shop, but a Ryder truck rental operation there. And they interviewed Elliott, but they also interviewed 2 of his employees, one of whom was a woman named Beamer, who had rented the truck to what turned out to be McVeigh. And the other was another employee who was a mechanic who worked in the body shop, who was taking his break at the time the truck was rented. Now, one of the most interesting things about that was that both of these witnesses identified a second person who was with McVeigh and described him rather specifically. And that led to the FBI creating 2 suspects, John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2. As things developed, John Doe number 1 proved to be McVeigh. John Doe number 2 was described as a muscular, fairly heavy-set man, similar age to McVeigh, who was wearing a very distinctive baseball cap that had some flames or something on it, a pattern that they remembered. Both of these witnesses remembered this person being there, John Doe number 2, and both of them remembered him in a very similar fashion. And they were used as a source for drawings by a forensic artist, and those drawings were released to the public. As an aside to that, there are a lot of dangers in releasing drawings of people early on. For instance, if you release drawings, you generally get just an absolute avalanche of calls of people who think they've seen somebody like that or who are nutballs or anything else. And the other danger is that if the real suspect turns out to not look anything like either one of those people, you've created a defense for that individual, because he can say, well, it wasn't me, look right here, here's a picture of the guy that they saw that rented this truck, and it wasn't me. So there's some danger in that. Now, as it turned out, the drawing of McVeigh was quite accurate, and it helped them identify him, first at the motel where he stayed there, and then at other locations in Junction City. But they never, the FBI did make I believe, conscientious search to try and determine who John Doe number 2 was. Now, to the satisfaction of the FBI, they believe that this was an individual who came into the store on a different date and with someone else who rented a truck, not McVeigh, and that the 2 witnesses were mistaken. That may in fact be true, but I don't think that you can altogether dismiss the fact that these statements were originally given by the 2 witnesses on the 21st of April, and the truck was rented on the 17th of April. So it was a very contemporaneous statement that they made, and furthermore, I would highly doubt that there were very many people going in and out of the Ryder truck rental place in Junction City, Kansas, so it wouldn't be like they could be very confused. So I think that regardless of what the FBI said, there is some reason to believe still that there might possibly, not necessarily, but might possibly have been someone there with McVeigh.
Bob Ricks.
We had many well-intentioned witnesses that believed that they saw Timothy McVeigh. We had over 50 witnesses, I believe, downtown that saw Timothy McVeigh at the same place simultaneously, all within about a 10-mile area where people were seeing him exactly at the same time. Now, all those people weren't liars. They really thought that they were seeing Timothy McVeigh. They had seen a Ryder truck, and you'd be shocked. I mean, you don't see Ryder trucks when you're not looking for them. But after the bombing, and I was usually spending about 20 hours a day at the bomb site, and then when I would come back in early in the mornings, I would see Ryder trucks everywhere I was. And before, I never saw Ryder trucks. So people now all of a sudden in their memory banks are pulling up these memories of seeing a Ryder truck, and then all of a sudden they have this picture of Timothy McVeigh in their mind, and all of a sudden they're now seeing Timothy McVeigh, and they're 100% sure that that was Timothy McVeigh. You have a lot of people like that really are trying to be helpful, and their mind is really playing tricks on them. They're so intent on this is such a disastrous situation that and they want to be helpful, but sometimes they're seeing things that are not real.
McVeigh's car was searched, and what investigators found was a packet of anti-government propaganda. In Trooper Charlie Hanger's patrol car, McVeigh left a business card for Paulson's Military Supply in Antigua, Wisconsin. On the back of the card was the notation, quote, TNT at $5 a stick. Need more. Call after 01 May. See if I can get some more. End quote. Some believe McVeigh left it on purpose to get Paulson in trouble with authorities. Then, a man who had worked with McVeigh as a security guard showed up at the FBI office in Buffalo, New York on April 21st because he recognized McVeigh from the composite drawing on TV. The FBI, they were skeptical at first, but this man also provided the FBI with taped conversations he had with McVeigh where he ranted against the federal government, providing a possible motive for the crime.
Have you decided whether this is just a coincidence that it happened on the 2nd anniversary of the Waco siege?
Again, We are pursuing all leads. We cannot tell exactly what happened or who is responsible, and it would be better not to comment until we can conclusively talk about it.
Things that I think most people were unaware of until the events of the past week was the extent to which the Waco incident and even you personally are such lightning rods for these citizen militia groups. How have you been reacting to that kind of very personalized venom and rage?
I think in any job like this, you have got to continue to put one foot in front of another, make your decisions based on the evidence and the law, hear from all concerned, and continue to try to do what you think is right. And that's exactly what I've been trying to do.
The FBI was following every possible lead, including the Decker, Michigan address that McVeigh had listed when he checked in at the Dreamland Motel in Kansas. McVeigh's driver's license matched that address. It was an address to Terry Nichols' family farm.
After the bombing, Nichols was concerned because McVeigh did not appear as scheduled. Then reports came out in the media that he and his brother James were suspects.
It was April 21st, and Terry Nichols realized he was under surveillance.
This created tremendous pressure on Nichols, and he was becoming paranoid and worried about what was going on, and he became convinced that someone was following him. In fact, they were following him, and it was FBI agents, and further, they wanted him to know that they were following him. They let him know, hoping that he would make some kind of mistake, and that's exactly what he did.
It was too much pressure, so Nichols decided to drive his wife and daughter to the police station in Harrington, Kansas, where he told the local police chief that he was alarmed that he was a suspect in the Oklahoma City bombing, and he wanted to talk to someone. In the search of the Nichols home, the FBI discovered incriminating evidence, including a receipt for 2,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer issued to a Mike Havens, 5 rolls of Primadet blasting caps, a bomb-making instruction book, McVeigh's military-issued rucksack and rifle, and a debit calling card.
Nichols had gone to one of the storage units, or both the storage units there in Harrington, and emptied out the units and tried to hide the things in his house. He'd also, what was left of the ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which was a considerable amount, he wasn't sure what to do with it, so he dumped it all over his lawn. And a neighbor saw him doing it and later said that it looked like there was snow all over his lawn. He dumped a huge amount of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, so thick that his whole lawn was white.
So the evidence was stark white.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't black and white. It was white.
Yeah, sure.
Or gray.
Then, and the fingerprint?
The fingerprint was on the receipt that both Nichols and McVeigh had bought fertilizer. McVeigh bought it a few sacks, 50-pound sacks at a time, and put it in the back of his car. He'd buy 1 or 2 sacks at a time and accumulated them. Nichols, on the other hand, bought at least 1, and I believe it was 2 huge lots of fertilizer and put them in his truck. He had a pickup truck, and he had bought 2,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer at one time, and he had the receipt made out to Mike Havens, which was just a pseudonym. It wasn't his name. It was an alias. But probably the most damning thing that they ended up finding was the Darrell Bridges credit card or calling card, because with that card they were able to track the telephone calls that McVeigh and Nichols had made back and forth to each other. They used that calling card to pay for the calls, but with that card they were able to pinpoint all the places that McVeigh and Nichols had been and all the people that they had called and when they called each other. And that turned out to be very important evidence and very important lead for the FBI to discover other evidence.
While the FBI was conducting the investigation, a federal grand jury was convened in Oklahoma City to consider the merits of the case and whether criminal charges should be brought.
Now, the key witnesses to convicting McVeigh and to some extent Nichols were two people named Fortier, Michael Fortier and his wife, and they were friends of McVeigh's. All these guys met in the Army.
As friends of McVeigh, they didn't want to cooperate, but once subpoenaed to appear before the grand jury, they agreed to testify. They were key witnesses in the investigation. Eventually, McVeigh and Nichols were indicted on 11 counts, along with a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. McVeigh and Nichols were in for a prolonged legal battle, yet the recovery and investigation continued.
I know that you have had a heightened state of alertness at federal buildings since this explosion, but are you rethinking what kind of security there should be and whether there should be daycare centers in federal buildings?
What we have tried to do is to take all possible steps at this time and to take reasonable precautions. Obviously, our first goal right now is to make sure that everything possible is done to support and aid the victims and their families, and from the law enforcement perspective, to do everything possible to follow every lead immediately to see that these people are brought to justice. Based on this investigation, we obviously will continue to review all steps that should be taken in similar circumstances.
What advice do you give to parents right now? For example, there was a report out of Baltimore today that a group of parents pulled their children off a bus that was heading to Washington for a day trip because of, are people panicking, and should they be?
I think it's important for all Americans to take reasonable precautions to continue to lead their lives. We will work with everyone concerned to try to take reasonable steps as we have in these last days. But when we face something like this, we must face it as a nation, supporting the victims and their families, and learn from this experience what we can do consistent with our Constitution to ensure the protection of our people.
A national memorial prayer service was planned and held just 4 days after the bombing. In our next episode, we look forward to bringing you excerpts and personal perspectives of that gathering, including President Bill Clinton, Governor Frank Keating, First Lady Kathy Keating, and the Reverend Billy Graham. I'm Brenda Bennett, and this is RealMysteries.us.